Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the EFG webinar Changing Gear New Roles in Energy Expansion about the transition from the oil and gas sector to other sectors within geoscience. My name is Marko, and I'm your host for today. I'm also the coordinator of EFG panel of experts on natural hazards and climate change. I'm the past president of EFG and currently the treasurer of International Raw Materials Observatory. The European Federation of Geologists is periodically organizing webinars to foster the professional development of fellow geologists and to increase public awareness of the importance of geoscience. I'm really happy to present the speakers of today's webinar. This is going to dry my mouth because there are lots of them and they have very interesting stories to share with you. First, we're going to start with David Pickering. He's a geologist focusing on leveraging his technical and project management experience to aid in the energy transition. Having started his career in Norway with Roxar and Statoil, then marrying a Dane, he's now back in Scandinavian company, working as a geoscience advisor for the Danish engineering firm Ramboll. Now, again based in London, he is primarily focused on CO2 storage, but has a secret desire to drill a geothermal well one day. Well, good luck with that, David. Following him is going to be Rosalie Constable. She spent almost 20 years working in technical geoscientists and manager roles for a number of research and oil and gas companies in different parts of the world. Around 3.5 years ago, she changed direction to focus more on contributing the energy transition while still making use of her skills and experience from geoscience and the oil and gas industry. Rosalie is now co-founder and technical director of consultancy company Sustainable, which provides ESG and emission advisory services to companies in the oil and gas, mining, and low carbon energy sectors. Following her, Dr. Rodney Garrard is a geologist with over 23 years of international experience in both the oil and gas industry and the nuclear waste industry. In 2018, Rodney pivoted into a project manager role at the National Cooperative for Disposal of Radioactive Waste, that's NAGRA. Following the completion of the data acquisition phase just last year, Rodney continued as a petrophysicist, or he rather calls himself as petrophysical engineer with NAGRA until September this year. Rodney has once again taken a leap of faith and pivoted into the global energy and insurance industry with ARC Insurance, making use of his diverse experience on subsurface projects. The next speaker will be Henk Kombrink. He's a physical geographer by training. He changed gear early in his career by doing the PhD in geology in Utrecht in Netherlands, straight after completing his studies. He then moved to Aberdeen a few years later to join Total, and after subsequent 6 years in subsurface consultancy, he found himself forced to make another change when the pandemic unfolded. However, that change was not as drastic as it now seems, as Henk will tell us a bit about more later in his presentation. Louise Vad-Pickering is subsurface professional with more than 17 years of experience in the energy industry. Her career includes technical and leadership roles in upstream oil and gas, renewables, and energy transition projects in Europe, Asia, and the US for Equinor, Leaf, and COWI. She has a Master of Science and Bachelor of Science in Marine Geology from Aarhus University in Denmark. Following her, Andy Wood describes himself, and of course doing his presentation, he describes himself as a Cornish vegetarian eco-warrior. He has a Bachelor of Science degree with honors in Earth Science from Queen Mary College, University of London, and 30 years upstream oil and gas experience, specifically in subsurface drilling and wells. From mud logging, well site geology and operations geology beginning, and he developed skills in operational optimization and cost saving, ultimately managing large subsurface teams, creating efficiency and reducing waste. And he has combined his passion for oil and gas and environmentalism to transition to geothermal energy. And the last will be Alex Orbell, who works as a hydrogen business development advisor for BP, and he will tell us more about his career later on. They will be speakers of today's webinar, and it will be a very interesting to know from their experience how their stories evolved through time. During the presentation, the audience can propose questions to the session of Q&A for the presenters to answer to them later on. So that's the function in Zoom, as you probably already know, but just to remind you. We will then select and answer some of these questions, of course, selecting the most interesting ones after all the presentations are done. Now, I will give the floor to Vad-Pickering, and he's the first speaker, as you could notice from the order that I introduced our speakers of the session. In addition, he will be also the moderator of the questions and answers session later on. David, please, you can start when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Marko, and thank you to the EFG for supporting and hosting this webinar. I guess I came up with the idea of this over the last few months based on a lot of questions that I've been asked, quite often through LinkedIn, but when I've met people also at conferences, and there's been a lot of requests for information as to how can I pivot? How can I get into these new opportunities? Is it possible? Is it a fluke? And I guess what I wanted to say is that there isn't just one story or one solution. There's a whole series of narratives out there, and I would like to share both my insights and some of my friends and colleagues' views on how they've managed to pivot out of oil and gas. I'd also like to say that it's not because any of us are necessarily anti-oil and gas. We've all had really good careers in those space, but we've, for many different reasons, have seen the opportunity to enhance our careers and build on what we've learned and take them into new areas. So I've got a couple of slides I'm going to talk through now. I'm currently, as I said on that previous slide, the market manager for Geoscience for Ramboll, which is an enormous Danish engineering company with something like 18,000 employees. It's very well known in Scandinavia. It's not particularly well known in the UK. And they hired me very recently to act as their CO2 storage and geoscience advisor. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But I wanted to do first, though, was to sort of describe my career and how I got to this place. And this plot is something that I've flogged a number of times in a number of different places, but it tells a nice story. The first thing is you can see the orange line, and the orange line is the oil price going up and down over the last 25 years since I went to university. What you can also see is the blue line, which represents atmospheric CO2 rising inexorably over the last 100 and something years, but you can see that nothing changes. The oil price changes, but the CO2 keeps going up. And I guess that's one of the reasons why we're here today, is the fact that a number of us, or many of us, are interested in seeing how we can do something to abate that process. Something else I want to draw your attention to on this plot is that although it might seem that pivoting into something outside of oil and gas is a big change, but if you look at each of our careers, most of us have had various pivot moments, and we've had throughout our careers, and we've reinvented ourselves a number of times. So in the case you can see here, my first 5 or 6 years, I was very focused on academia. And then I moved into working for companies such as Statoil and RWE, where I was working in appraisal and asset development. And then subsequently, I moved more into new ventures, and then I moved into exploration. And over the last 4 years, I've been focused more on the energy transition space. So I think our careers should always be seen as chapters, and we shouldn't necessarily think of pivot as some sort of lurch or swing into a new direction. Our careers are always a series of continuous career development. As you can see with the education, you know, whether you're focusing on economics or you're doing a training course on geothermal, or you're going to look at something to do with project management, I think it's a really important to think of ourselves as a continuous adjustment to our circumstances. And in that sense, it doesn't therefore feel so scary to me, the idea of doing something new. If we move on to the next slide. So I want to sort of try and provide some very simple insights and observations. And I know what a number of the others are going to present in the coming slides, so I won't labor these points. But I guess the first thing to say is, you know, our careers are a journey, and it needs to be exciting. And we're very lucky. We work in industries that are extremely rewarding most of the time. Not necessarily financially, but certainly in terms of the academic stimulation that they provide us with. No journey is a straight line, and there's always twists and turns. And I think you have to also accept that, you know, it's not the way I'm pitching this. It sounds like it's all gone great. There's certainly been some dead alleys that I've headed down, and I wouldn't want to imply that for each and every one of you, there's the opportunity and the golden uplands that you can get there in a straight line. It's all dead easy. However, I think it's worth pursuing. It won't happen overnight. And I would also say that you have to be a little bit prepared for the financial aspects of some of this, because not all jobs pay as well as oil and gas jobs. Some do, some don't. And not everyone has the same financial backing. Dual careers, for example, if your partner is in a similar role or has a well-paid job, you can take different types of risk compared to somebody who's on their own. So I think it's quite important to think about things in your own personal context. It's not for everyone. Something else that I get commented on a lot is about the use of things like LinkedIn. I never used LinkedIn before about 3.5 years ago because I never needed to. I had a perfectly successful career where I just knew things happened and they came my way. But the one thing that happens when you leave the oil and gas industry is that nobody knows you exist. And I think it's incredibly important to accept that you do have to somehow, in some capacity, get noticed. And regardless of whether you're an extrovert or an introvert or a certain personality type, you have to find a way to get in front of other people. It might not be attending webinars, but it certainly you need to think in that space. People won't be able to engage with you or make offers to you or acknowledge your existence if they don't know you exist. So you need to get out there. The other thing I'd also, though, is having spent enough time talking to people, is realizing just how much of a knowledge gap there is outside of these science industries or science departments within these industries. I've talked to investors and industrial emitters and organizations are very, very heavy on science and are very smart people, but they literally have no idea about what goes on underground, not even the basics. And so there's a very simple opportunity. And whether you're a hardcore technical person or whether you are more of a managerial type or a leader, then it's about finding your niche and where you think you add value. And for me, it's a little bit of a hybrid. I would say you do need to do some study, though. This isn't just a simple, okay, I've decided I'm going to be a geothermal expert, or I've decided I'm going to work in CCS. You do need to study. And I think it's important, so as not to give yourself a nosebleed, to do what I call continuous self-investment. So a little bit regularly. It's a bit like doing exercise. You just got to keep exercising that brain muscle to really make sure you are picking things up as you go along. I personally didn't see the need to do a master's. I think, one thing from my perspective is, I was a little over 40 years old when I left an oil company, and I was too old to change was the first question I had. And then my second question was, am I too young not to? And so there was this debate in my head about, should I go back to university? Could I afford to? Was it necessary? And I think that will be different for different people. But what I've seen is that given the 20 years of very, very good quality training and experiences that I've had in oil and gas, they translate extremely well into other domains. In my case, I've focused more on CO2 storage with this secret desire to do geothermal one day, but it's all about CO2. But you do need to do some study, and you can't just be liking things on LinkedIn. You need to be a bit more engaged than that. And I also think, just as a simple tip, I'd also find a like-minded person with which to share the journey. I've networked with a lot of people over the last few years, and there's a couple of people in some other countries whom I've never met actually, but we constantly sharing ideas and thoughts. They're not actually even geoscientists, but they're people who've pivoted out of oil and gas and have ended up in new roles. And I find that very, very rewarding, because it means that your sort of concerns and fears and hopes and aspirations can also be, you can discuss them with someone, because it's quite important not to do this on your own. Because if you're working in a large organization one day with hundreds of colleagues and then you're not working with anyone, you've got to be very careful not to end up in a situation where you are isolated. And it's very important, therefore, to keep talking to people. So going on to my last slide, I'm aware that this might sound a little bit pithy, but you've got to use your common sense. We all know what we need to do in these space. There's no magic silver bullets, but here's some sort of simple tips from me, because I like learning, and I've always liked learning, and I think that is one of the ways to stay engaged with your job, is to keep doing new things and giving yourself new challenges. So I was trying to divide it up into sort of the senses, as it were. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts. I find that's a way of learning stuff rather easily, because you're going for a hike up a mountain or walk around the block. You can listen to podcasts. I think I particularly like the Redefining Energy podcast at the moment. That gives some insights into things that aren't so subsurfacey, but I think that's quite important when you're moving into these new domains, where understanding the role of power to X or hydrogen or a lot of these other new technologies, how they actually fit together, I think that's incredibly important. A little bit of training. So I've self-invested in a number of training courses. This particular one that's listed there is one that is very, very detailed, advanced subsurface course that I did a couple of years ago. Yeah, I think, there are times and places where you do need to spend money, and that requires a little bit of commitment, shall we say. I've also written a few articles for various publications, including Henk's GeoExpro. I wrote an article a couple of years ago about CCS in Scandinavia. I was actually approached about that particular article, and yeah, we got it on the front cover. And it's all about, in that case, it's about publicity. And I think it's important sometimes to acknowledge that it's okay to wave your flag and get noticed. It's very easy to sort of say, oh, I don't do this sort of stuff, but you're not going to get out there unless you do something. You need to and do something that you're informed about, and leverage all that knowledge and experience you have. And then finally, books, because I like reading books. So there's a couple of books here that I was just as placeholders, really. But the first one is an oil and gas book. You can't get away from the fact that understanding the subsurface from oil and gas gives you a large number of tools. If you know what a PVT is, if you know how to interpret a gamma ray log, these things matter for a lot of other things. If you know how to run a TCM meeting, or if you are able to coordinate projects, these are all skills that you need in other industries. This particular book on geothermal, I think, is first class. It's not cheap. You have to get it, I think it's over £100, but it's thoroughly worth it. And yeah, it's my Bible go-to book, full of case studies. That's what the new energy transition is about. You need to give examples, because there aren't that many out there. So you need to get out there and find out where they are. The volcanoes one is, well, keep it fun, because I like volcanoes. And, the point is, in terms of learning, you've got to make sure it's still fun. If it gets all serious and too bogged down, particularly if you've lost your job and are looking for a new role, I think you can probably get a bit depressed just sitting there reading very heavy academic papers. So find fun things to make it interesting too. And finally, with the CCS, this is one of the books by my old boss, Phil Ringrose. He's a world-class academic in that space. And there are books out there now that have been published in the last couple of years that really bring together a lot of the observations that are out there. So yeah, I think, on that note, I would just say it's not for everyone, but it is possible. It's not an easy journey, in the sense it's not a straight line, but I think all the people on the call today are proof that it is possible. And I'll come back to this at the end during the Q&A. So on that note, I will pass over to the next person. Rosie.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thank you for including me in this session today, and a lot of things that David has just said has really resonated with me as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing about others' journeys and the variety of directions that people have taken. So I've gone in the direction of ESG, emissions and sustainability, with our company Sustainable. So I'm still utilising the experience I have from the oil and gas industry, but now focusing on supporting companies in the hard to abate and low carbon energy sectors with their ESG strategies and emissions accounting and forecasting. So to help provide some context on this, I'll spend a few minutes on how I got to where I am today, and then go into more detail about what I'm doing now. So I don't have a nice looking graph like David did, but you just have to go with the icons. So it was quite a while ago now that I studied earth science at University of Adelaide. I initially intended to do ecology or marine biology, and only did geology as an extra subject in first year just to make up the points I needed. But I found it really fascinating, and I particularly liked the systemic nature of geology, and that it incorporates all aspects of the sciences. And that's a theme that's sort of carried through my career and is particularly pertinent in the work that I'm doing now. So after undergrad, geology students at Adelaide mostly either chose a mining route or the petroleum route. And for me, the opportunity to travel and work in different parts of the world was really appealing. And I felt that there was perhaps more of an opportunity to do this in the oil and gas industry. And so for my honours degree, I specialised in petroleum geoscience. And that course included an 8-week placement at Shell. So I got the opportunity to see what it was like working in a company. But then when I finished honours, the price of oil was about $10 a barrel. And so I decided to wait out that slump in the industry by doing a PhD for the next 3 years. I hadn't initially intended to do a PhD, but because of the state of the industry, that was the route I took. Then after I finished studying, the first few jobs I had were with government research organisations in Australia and New Zealand. And then from there, I moved to OMV and spent the next 15 years or so with oil and gas operators. And so during that time, I had the opportunity to work on a huge range of projects across New Zealand, Africa, Asia. I was able to live and work in different countries, experience different cultures, work with diverse teams. And also over that period, I guess I experienced a fairly typical career progression for the industry. So I started with technical geoscience roles and then progressed to team leader roles, asset manager. And for a long time, I was quite reluctant to take on the management roles. I really liked the technical work that I did, and I was sure that that's the career route I wanted to stay in. But now I'm really glad that I did challenge myself to take on those sorts of roles, because that management experience and getting experience of the wider business has just been really invaluable over the last few years. So then, just as COVID was ramping up, I was made redundant. But even before then, I wanted to do something different, but I just didn't know what that something different might be. And so I didn't ever really seriously consider leaving my job with its perceived security and regular paycheck. So in a way, redundancy was actually quite liberating for me, because it gave me the push to take that step that I probably wouldn't have been courageous enough to take on my own. But even then, it took the best part of a year and some career coaching before I really started to focus and find my passion in the emissions and ESG work that I'm doing now. So during that transition period, I was doing various consultancy projects. A few projects I was working as an oil and gas geoscientist, but then there were other projects that I was doing that was much more in the energy transition space. And so I did a couple of projects for a mining technology startup. I was doing constraints mapping for wind projects and even editing scientific papers for non-native English-speaking authors. And it was during this time also that I connected again with a colleague that I'd worked with in OMV New Zealand, who was also working on energy transition projects in the UK. And we did a couple of projects together, and we saw the potential opportunity to utilise our experience and understanding of the industry to support companies with their ESG and emissions efforts. And so that's how our company Sustainable was born. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what am I doing now? Well, it's been a massively steep learning curve, both on the technical side of things and on the business side of things. So our company has evolved and is still evolving in terms of what we focus on and offer to our clients. And right from the start, we decided we would focus on companies in the hard to abate sectors, particularly oil and gas and mining, because we're quite surprised actually the number of consultancies in the ESG sustainability arena that don't have that understanding of the industry, and they don't have that appreciation of the challenges and restrictions that the companies have to work to, or else they just flat out refuse to work with these so-called dirty companies. But from our perspective, the metabolism of our society is energy hungry, and at the moment the majority of this energy comes from fossil fuels. And so my co-founder and I, Rachel, we're both mums with young families, and it's for our kids' sort of benefit that we want to see a managed transition to lower fossil fuel use. And so we feel that if we can help the industry to deliver energy and materials in a cleaner, more equitable way, then that is the key driver for what we do and why we do it. So I've included a snapshot here of the key areas where we support our clients. So for the company advisory services, I continually draw on the experience and skills that I've developed over my career in the oil and gas industry. And as David said, it's not just the technical skills that you have, it's managing projects and running meetings and dealing with other stakeholders. But there's also a lot of new technical things to learn. So there's a load of different ESG reporting frameworks that are out there, and that in itself is a rapidly evolving environment. Understanding regulatory requirements is really important, risk management, company culture, communication strategies, just to name a few. For the due diligence services, there's a lot of similarities here to the new ventures work. So it requires critical evaluation of data and claims that companies are making, benchmarking with industry peers. And then for the emissions accounting and forecasting, there's some parallels to prospect and lead volumetrics and portfolio management, as well as that experience and knowledge of the operations that go on in the industry, so that when you're generating a full account of the emission sources, you know what's involved in each of the operations and where those emission sources could lie, so that you can create a more complete picture of the emissions. So with all of this, there's been a huge amount of self-learning that I've done and still do, reading mountains of reports and papers, webinars, online short courses, as David's already said. I've also invested in a couple of more formal accredited courses. The main one was Transition Engineering through the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. And I felt that this had a more practical, systemic approach and a workflow for transforming unsustainable systems compared to other sustainability courses that I was looking at. And then I've also done ISO accreditation courses for the emissions accounting. So aside from all of the technical knowledge building that I've been doing, there's also been a steep learning curve for me in terms of building up a company and running a company. I hadn't ever had an ambition to start or run a company before. My parents had a small business when I was growing up, but it was never something that I thought I would do. But it's really rewarding and empowering to be in the driving seat to create a company that is a great place to work, but while also making a positive impact for our clients. So there's a huge number of just general business skills that I've been learning, accounting, dealing with contracts, managing staff. So yeah, it's a very wide-ranging set of skills that I've been building up, but really rewarding because I found my passion. So okay, so we go to the next slide. Right, so we were discussing this topic the other day as a team because all of us have transitioned from various industries, and so we understand that making a transition like this can seem overwhelming and scary. But it really does help to shift the mindset and focus on the big opportunities that are there. So to start with, I think David sort of addressed some of these already, but just from my perspective, when I wanted to sort of start and do that something different, it felt like I'm starting from scratch. I've invested so much in my career and my degrees and all of the extra courses that I did throughout my career. I'm just going back to square one. But the opportunity here is that we're all lifelong students, and I'm sure everyone on the call has a love of learning, and so you can apply that to something that you're really passionate about. And then also, no one's starting from scratch anyway, because we all have these valuable transferable skills and experience that can be applied to a whole range of different things. So the energy transition itself is a huge area, and that can seem really overwhelming. There's also a lot of uncertainty, but that can be said for almost any industry at the moment. It's so volatile. But the opportunity is that there's also a huge scope of different types of roles that are needed for the transition, and that's demonstrated by the variety of the speakers today. So you have the opportunity to, if you can find your niche, to really shape the directional progress of a company or even an industry. And then lastly, I'm glad David mentioned it already, because it doesn't always get mentioned when you're talking about transitioning careers, is that there's a risk that you will need to take a pay cut, because most other industries just don't pay as well as what we see in the oil and gas industry. And I've certainly seen a reduction in my pay over the last few years. But it can help if you're able to prepare and build up a buffer that can help relieve the anxiety about being able to pay the bills or the mortgage. I have always been the main wage earner in our household. And so this was a massive source of stress for me through this period. But I've also reevaluated what I need to be fulfilled and happy. And so that takes much less money than I thought was previously necessary, but also the fulfillment I get from the work that I do now goes a long way beyond having a big salary. So on that note, I will leave it there, and thank you so much for having me. And I hope that sharing these experiences is helpful for someone, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So thanks, Rosalie. Can everyone hear me? Just a quick comment, I think so. Yep, great. Okay, thanks. Yeah, good afternoon. So my name is Rodney Garrard. It's with pleasure actually to share a few slides on sort of new roles in this energy expansion space that we currently inhabit. I think it's very common to hear that oil and gas folks should get a job within the sort of the transition space, but there are very few events, seminars, etc., outlining sort of familiar skills, workflows that they can bring or use. So thanks to David for sort of initiating this seminar, for the rest of the presenters for sharing their experiences, and of course to Marko and the EFG for hosting this seminar. And it's just to profess to say that I don't have all of the answers, but just to briefly show how my career has unfolded and that we have some key skills that are undoubtedly transferable. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, so that's me. Geoenergy advisor for Arch Insurance. Next slide, please. So I go again with this idea of a visual CV. I think to be very clear from the outset that it hasn't been a linear path as is shown here. I studied geology. I actually grew up in New Zealand. It was kind of a natural progression to study geology and learn about the world outside. I ended up in the oil and gas lane very quickly in Australia as a mudlogger in the Coopers Basin, up in the top top half of the visual CV screen. That was for Santos in Australia. That was very remote work. This was the mid-90s. You had to be very self-reliant even to get to the drill site. It was an amazing entry point into the oil and gas industry and an amazing foundation of experience that I've sort of come to appreciate ever since. At the time, I thought it was quite hard yakka, but then I ended up, if you sort of follow the progression, I ended up in the North Sea and in the Gulf of Mexico on what was then deep water prospects, whether they were high pressure, high temperature, or multilateral horizontal prospects as a data engineer in MWD. And this was at a time I was working for Schlumberger at the time, and this was at a time of sort of cross training. And I remember one example in particular on the drill ship that you can see up there, just sort of rigging up and just having to make it work. This was the time when the industry was going through a sort of a revolution in drilling efficiencies, and which meant that we had lots of practice. We were basically rigging up and rigging down BHAs, if not every second shift, every shift. So what this means to survive in those times was that we had to become very time efficient in terms of operations, but also in terms of QCing the data and making that data available. Getting down towards the lower part of that visual CV, I then transferred into sort of a well-site operations role. It was a sort of a logical progression. I worked with some fantastic DSVs in the Norwegian sector, drilling superintendents. They wanted succinct answers on certain subsurface events that they were seeing. So myself and I, the team, we quickly realized that there was also a wealth of information from the drilling side that we were seeing in the subsurface realm. So we formed a very successful sort of multidisciplinary team to come to a sort of much greater understanding of the subsurface. And in those days in Norway, it was very much focused on KPI metrics. And every operation was basically challenged, and having a good operational foundation, coming back to those days as a mudlogger data engineer, MWD was something I could contribute to. So we're sort of progressing along now. In 2016, 2017, there were basically too many operational geologists in the Norwegian sector for the number of available projects. And so after 8 years of working in the Norwegian sector, I really started looking at my options in terms of where could I contribute in this geoscience realm. And I had the fortunate possibility to come across an exploration campaign in Switzerland for the purpose of deep geological disposal for nuclear waste. And so I started in this project in middle of 2018. I initially started with the idea of assisting sort of the coring program and the sampling program, and then quickly assumed the role for project manager for sort of the logging and testing sequence as well. They needed a hand with the setting up a data acquisition program for the logs and also for the microhydraulic fracturing, which were done on a wireline formation testing string, which I'd had quite a bit of experience with. So that sort of resulted in a 4-year data acquisition campaign. It exposed me to the concept of real data boreholes. So while you say, well, most of us in the oil and gas industry, we would say, okay, we know what a data borehole is, but until you've actually been involved in a program where you're not actually extracting any resources, it's a significant change in mindset. And this sort of exposed me to integrative data sets at various scales, publishing the results a lot, lots of peer-reviewed journal, lots of talks, and the reviewing process and the rad waste business, it's on a different level. So it really takes it into another realm. After 5 years at looking very detailed at the northern Swiss geology, I needed some fresh perspectives. And just recently, I've been lucky enough to get the opportunity to join Arch, a global energy insurance company, in what is a very new role, which finds myself assisting energy underwriters and actuaries, both in the conventional upstream portfolio, but also the new energy streams that are coming online. So next slide, please. So trying to come up with all of the term that captures this experience is a bit like sort of Gandalf the Navigator. If you just go back and play that video.
Didn't think it would end this way.
End? No, the journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path. One that we all must take. The grey rain curtain of this world rolls back and all turns to silver glass. And then you see it.
What? Gandalf. See what?
White shores. And beyond. A far green country. And to a swift sunrise.
That isn't so bad.
No. No, it isn't.
Good. Next slide, please. So any reference to Middle Earth is a good reference. Gandalf the Navigator. Nuclear waste disposal represented another discipline where an operations geologist type experience, so that broad geological experience of both execution and accessing the subsurface and assessing the subsurface is key. Prior to getting into the nuclear waste disposal, I'd sort of tallied up, I'd been on about 125 projects of various complexity on 5 continents over an 18-year period. Many of my colleagues in the waste disposal, rad waste campaign were sort of, didn't have that much experience or even on their first exploration campaign. So Gandalf the Navigator fitted in quite nicely. I wrote this easy read article here, which is the second point. Nuclear waste repositories, a new frontier for petrophysical engineers. I wrote this for the Society of Petroleum and Well Log Analysts, and you can read it in the link. But basically coming up with the term petrophysical engineers as opposed to petrophysicists, so basically trying to capture that integrated nature of petrophysics as a discipline, not only for the interpretation side, but also for operational de-risking. That was new in the rad waste industry. See as many projects as possible, not only in your core field, but also in other disciplines, as this provides contextualizing insights and operational methods. What I basically mean by that is, for the first 2 wells in northern Switzerland, I was on site just about every day, just to kind of understand how other subsurface testing sequences, for example, hydro testing, which is done in rad waste, that's not the usual remit for most E&P folk. I've also sort of had the opportunity, I've just been fortunate generally, to have worked in many medium-sized companies where it became commonplace to wear many hats. So yeah, just those skills are definitely transferable. And it goes without saying that, you know, the best geologists are the ones that have seen the most rocks. You know, while this holds much truth, you know, it's only part of the subsurface puzzle. And to a truly to acquire truly good understanding, we must make observations, but not only what is there, but identifying anomalies in often imperfect and incomplete data sets. So that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about the current trend of using artificial intelligence for everything, and that a capable geologist won't be replaced for the foreseeable future, but only maybe those geologists that don't embrace artificial intelligence. If I just go back to this point a little bit, the interpretation, so a key part of seeing as many projects as possible is the uncertainties, both the uncertainties in acquisition and the uncertainties in interpretation, just to highlight another point on that last subsurface puzzle. Okay, the next slide. So, new roles in the energy expansion. You've been there before, you know where you're supposed to go on the map, maybe not the exact street, but you know generally in terms of what is geological due diligence, whether it's a CCS project or a hydrogen storage project or nuclear waste disposal project. You maybe not know the exact path, but you can definitely assist and or get the team there. The ability to operate in a team, be flexible about roles and listen to others when they speak. You know, Gandalf was wise, but he never forgot to learn from others. Just the word of caution here is being involved in a rad waste project, and a lot of oil and gas operators or consulting companies would often come into the meetings and act like sharks without listening first of what was required. So just have the ability to sort of listen first and see where you can contribute would be my advice. And if you don't have the experience, set the goal to see as many projects as possible, not only in your core field, but in other disciplines. That was a sort of a repeat of the previous point on the opposite slide. I made mistakes in the waste disposal acquisition program. Temperature logs came to mind. In the rad waste business, they are experts at temperature logs. We're not experts in the oil and gas industry. They're a secondary acquisition. And also, I was just at the EAGE meeting in Paris last week, and there was a topic about we need to know more about caprock for CCS projects. Well, I mean, you go to your local, or your national radioactive waste storage project in your country of origin, and they'll tell you how caprock, really understanding caprock works. So the EMP industry, it's a dynamic place. It's technical, it's challenging, and it's a difficult industry. We've lived through it. But a fundamental aspect of the oil and gas industry is optimization. We learn this from day one: what to spend, how to spend. My last 3 years with Wintershall in the Norwegian sector was having the mindset of trying to do more with less. And then I jumped into the radioactive waste business in Switzerland, and the concept was, well, what's possible? That was quite refreshing. These are all transferable. Most of the guys I know in the oil and gas industry are very skilled with databases, how they should be set up, how they should be maintained. How do we have the latest information at our fingertips? We're used to dealing with large volumes of data. Interpretation and prediction, again, I come back to that point regarding uncertainties on acquisition, uncertainties in sort of modeling. And then last but not least, coming back to Gandalf's quote of all turns to silver glass. It's a great example about other paths that lie ahead. So if anything today, it's keeping your toolkit sharp and keep navigating in your discipline. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodney. I guess it's my turn now. So I have unmuted myself. So my name is Henk Kombrink. On the slide, you see science journalism. I think during my talk, it will become clear it's not exactly science journalism. It's more like journalism, what I do. But yeah, it has evolved a bit from where I started. So Can you put up the next slide, please? Thank you. My slides are not text heavy. I do write a lot these days for my job, but I decided to put only some pictures on the slides and talk a bit to them. So how did it all start? I am from the Netherlands, as you can probably tell from my accent. I was born in the north of the Netherlands, over here on the map, you see. I lived there for almost 18 years and then moved to Utrecht in the middle of the country to study physical geography. Why did I choose that? Just because I liked field work and being outside, studying the natural world. And I think from the Netherlands, being a flat country, I had never been exposed to geology too much. Maybe that's the reason why I didn't go and study geology in the first place. But I had a great time, 5 years. Especially the last 3 years were quite nice because we had a small group of friends, about 5 of us, and we decided to organize field trips ourselves. So we actually went on a field trip with our on one of the courses. We were in the back of the bus to a field trip to Denmark, and that's where we decided to run these field trips ourselves. And we compiled the whole program, and I think over the course of 2-3 years, we visited a lot of places in the Netherlands, but also in Germany, in Belgium, where you can actually find some outcrops. And in this photo in the lower left corner is one of those field trips to the southwest of the country. It's an area, it's called the Zeeland, which you can probably see from the image, to visit an actual tidal marine environment. But thinking about that again just today, it feels like it's something extracurricular we did, but it has given me a lot of exposure to different things. And also we invited university professors sometimes to take us out to the field, and even that was possible. So I think even during my studies, I learned to take initiative and learning on the side and related to what I was studying during the day. And I think my love of rocks kind of started evolving at the time as well. In the 5th year or 4th year of my program, we didn't have the bachelor master program at the time. It was more like a continuous 5 years. I started doing shallow borehole coring in the western part of the country. So that's the Rhine-Meuse Delta, as we call it. And I studied the kind of Holocene fluvial architecture of the River Rhine and the River Meuse. And this photo in the top left corner is a kind of example of what we did. So this is a so-called suction core. It's all operated by hand, and we kind of suck the sand in a piston, using a piston up into a tube, and we're able to study the fluvial sands in that way. And I've done a lot of those shallow boreholes up to, let's say, 15 meters or so, 20 maximum, never realizing that I would study wells and well data for the rest of my career. But I think it started developing there at the time. So that was my first 5 years in Utrecht. And straight after that, which I think is not too untypical for the Netherlands, but in the UK, people are moving around a lot more. But I just stayed in Utrecht and embarked on a PhD. That was my first kind of step sideways to an extent, because I moved to geology, to the deepest subsurface, and the way that came about is during the final phase of my studies. I did an internship at NAM in the north of the country, close to where I grew up actually. I stayed with my brother at the time to study one of the gas fields in the northern part of the Netherlands. And I studied a Carboniferous field, and I had to look at the fluvial architecture of that particular gas field. And that was really my first proper introduction into the deeper subsurface of the Netherlands. And it really got me realizing that there is so much more beyond, well, at the time I had primarily looked at the Holocene, which is interesting enough, but yeah, a whole new world opened up for me. So at the time, that was in late 2003, I saw an advert on a PhD position by the Geological Survey and Utrecht University combined about the Carboniferous of the Netherlands and surrounding areas. And I thought, well, I'm going to give it a try. And before that, by the way, I think it's good to mention, I had never really thought about my career. I had never planned anything. I had just done I ran the courses I liked to do, I found interesting. And up till this time, I don't regret having done that, because I'm still looking back at it very positively. And I think as a student, I appreciated probably not having to think too much about the future. And I think that is a bit different nowadays, with students planning a lot more in advance. But I never really did that to the point where I actually got the PhD, a little bit to my surprise, because I wasn't a geologist in that sense, but I was still offered a position. Maybe you can go to the next slide. No, maybe one back. Sorry. Let's keep my PhD for a bit. So I studied the Carboniferous of the Netherlands for about 5 years, and I think the main takeaway from that, well, I studied a lot of cores, as you can see here from the core warehouse in Utrecht. So that was my first introduction to core data. I will come back to that too. But I think another thing that really helped, or I benefited a lot from doing my PhD, is learning to write. Of course, I did write a master thesis, that was fine, but learning how to formulate a research question, coming up with an approach how to tackle it, and then subsequently write it up, I have benefited a lot from that. Even though when I finished my PhD in 2008, I thought, well, what have I done over the past 5 years? It took me 5 years. I really struggled sometimes to see the benefit of that, and seeing friends having traveled the world, lots of practical experience. I thought, what have I really done? But now looking back at it, a few more years later, I think it has been quite good, because I benefit from that a lot, especially the writing element. So can you move the slide now, please? Yeah, so from Utrecht, I moved to Aberdeen in 2011. I had worked after my PhD for a number of years at the Geological Survey of the Netherlands, still in Utrecht. So at that time, I thought, well, it's time to do something else. And together with my girlfriend, now wife, she's sitting next door, we thought, we have to do it now. She was doing a PhD in Switzerland. I was still alone in Utrecht, and we thought, well, let's go somewhere else together. And that turned out to be Aberdeen. So in 2011, when oil price was still high, and I had never really realized it was that high, but I think for me, it enabled me to find a job in oil and gas at the time, which wasn't actually that easy still, but looking back, there were opportunities. So I joined Total for 3 years. I felt like, well, it didn't really cut the mustard for me. So then I joined a consultancy company in Aberdeen in 2014, just in time before the crisis, the oil price started to drop dramatically, which was, for me, it was quite a learning to see the dramatic effect an oil price drop has on a city like Aberdeen, which is still focused on offshore operations a lot, North Sea, and all the redundancy rounds we had in the consultancy firm, LR Synergy, over the 6 years I was there. That was quite, a learning for me, an experience, let's put it that way. But during the course of those 6 years, up to 2020, I learned a lot, subsurface analysis, whatever, that was all great. But in 2019, I was started to look a bit sideways already. I had started a small company called North Sea Core, and that came about because I was attending a meeting at an operator at some point, and they said, well, we try to get rid of some core from a field we are decommissioning in the North Sea. So I thought, well, that's an opportunity, because until that time, as my previous slide showed, I had seen a fair bit of core, but I had always had it was never possible to get a piece, because it's the holy grail. Once you core from a field 3 kilometers deep in the middle of the North Sea, you're not going to have a bit of that. But yeah, once these fields are taken out of production, then it's a different story. So I started doing that, and then teamed up with Kirsty Wright from Edinburgh, and we formed North Sea Core, where we kind of now take delivery of that core material and distribute it to the wider geoscience community. We've got a core store, which is nothing more than just a steading here just north of Aberdeen, and it's chock-a-block with core from a lot of different fields, different ages, different deposition environments, and all of that goes to universities or other interested parties all over the world. So that was kind of my first step to the side in terms of working in the oil and gas sector, still related to it. But and I do remember talking to my manager at the time. She took me aside on one occasion, and she said, "Are you making any money out of this?" And I said, well, yeah, I have to cover the costs, but of course I had a day job and etc. It wasn't too much of a concern. But yeah, it caused a bit of friction, I must say. So when the pandemic unfolded in 2020, a bit similar to Rosalie, I think, we were all let go. Our project portfolio dried up in a day. It was remarkable. And I think the management at the time saw it as a great opportunity to get rid of us all, and that happened. And since then, yeah, I thought for me it was also a bit liberating in that sense, because I had some more flexibility to work on North Sea Core. I must admit, it doesn't generate a full income, and it didn't do that at the time either. So I had to look for something else on the side, but it gave me a little bit more flexibility. But in 2019 already, before I was made redundant, I started looking at other things too. And I got in touch with this small Norwegian outfit, GeoExpro News at the time. They ran a website reporting on news, subsurface type of news in Northwest Europe. So that didn't go ahead, but when the pandemic had unfolded, they came back to me saying, well, are you still interested to become an editor for our website? And yes, of course I was, because I had just been made redundant. And so it happened. And maybe you can go to the next slide now. Yeah. So I started writing for this website, GeoExpro News, with a few people in Norway. I started traveling to join their conferences. Well, not in a pandemic; it was all remote, of course. But once the possibility came around, I did so. So I only met the team physically, I think almost 2 years later after we started working together. But that has now evolved, that's a bit more than a year now, into becoming the editor for this magazine. I'm holding on this picture here, taken at the EFG in Vienna this year, and that's the GeoExpro magazine. So I am now the editor for that magazine, and that is really my most important job at the time, or at the moment. It takes about 80% of my time, if not more. We publish 6 of those magazines per year, and I'm responsible for all the content, but also content that we get delivered. I read it all. I sometimes produce a few images or maps for these articles. I do an interview for each edition of the magazine, and that is the other guy in the photo. That's one of my interviewees, Cesar from Colombia. I met him for just a few minutes before he had to leave in Vienna, which was really nice. And for me, these interviews are a great way to get to know people a bit better and learn about their careers, because that is what these interviews are mainly about. So yeah, that is my kind of journey, and on the side, I am also the editor for the Netherlands Journal of Geoscientists. By the way, that's the third kind of pillar of my so-called portfolio career at the moment. But that doesn't take an awful lot of time. That's a scientific magazine, and I oversee the kind of editorial process there as well. So yeah, looking back at how it all unfolded, I think, David, you mentioned that a few times during your presentation. A career isn't like one curve up and it gets better all the time. That's not my experience at all. But a career is, I think, unpredictable to quite an extent. And I've had a few moments where, looking back, okay, that was a pivotal moment, but at the time maybe you don't realize. Or a PhD, you finish it and you think, oh, what have I done? What is the use of all this? But only a few years later, you start realizing that it was actually quite useful in a lot of ways. So I think it's important to do things right at the moment, and not maybe to think too much about, okay, how useful is it? Because you never know when it's going to be useful. At least, again, that is how I view my career so far. But when an opportunity arises, like the core that I showed you, I told you a bit about, that was a genuine opportunity, and I will never forget that moment. And I don't regret having kind of taken the initiative to see, okay, can I have some? And looking back now, it's been crazy. We have had 900 requests so far, and it's still ongoing. And that is really satisfying. So I would say, if you see an opportunity, try to embark on it. And that is my few words, my 2 cents. Thanks a lot.
Okay, I guess that's me up, hoping that everybody can hear me and that this is working all right. My laptop basically crashed during the previous talk, so unfortunately, Henk, I didn't hear all of that, but hopefully we can catch up afterwards. Yeah, I must admit, some great talks so far, and really interesting listening to some of my contemporaries and even seniors in terms of David Pickering, who used to be my boss in a past life. Just hearing how their journeys have gone since then. I feel a bit of an imposter compared to most people here, because I left the traditionally what you would call geology, geoscience quite some time ago, and went into down the commercial road. But what I can say is that the grounding in good science and how to combine science with successful business was essential for me to make a good transition into working as a commercial advisor. And maybe that's a good segue into just quickly going through my journey to get here on the next slide. maybe the next one. And there's an awkward legal disclaimer here. I have to say this actually. Any views expressed today are not views of BP. They are expressly my own views. And yeah, none of this material should be seen as a BP official publication. Yeah, on to the next one. Yes, so how did I get here? So I came from a perspective of being quite concerned actually about climate when I was younger, and when I was thinking about where to go to university and what to do at university, which is why I ended up doing oceanography with a kind of view on the climate, and that naturally sort of led me into environmental consultancy as my first job. And I was surprised going into environmental consultancy to realize that actually, rather than doing something that was green and sustainable, most of the work I was doing for the big clients were actually oil and gas companies. And I kind of twigged at that point that the change, if it was going to come from anywhere, needed to come from big business, and particularly big oil and gas business. So that kind of set me down the path of the pretty long and winding path to where I am now, starting in oil and gas companies. And obviously, I've had some great classic oil and gas geology fun along the way. 7 years doing technical roles across exploration, appraisal, development, working Mauritania, new ventures, Kenya. That's in fact just to prove that I have been a geologist once in a past life, or a geophysicist, at least in this sense. That's me next to a Vibra-sized truck in Kenya when we were about to shoot the VSP. I eventually felt after working about 7 years in the technical side of things, I did feel the call of my ultimate objective and aim, which was to kind of get into the more sort of sustainable, renewable side of the energy business. And I kind of thought to myself, well, what's the best way of doing this from where I am now? And within Tullow at the time, there were recruiting for people to go into commercial. So I saw the opportunity, went into commercial as an analyst, worked on the Kenya and Uganda project, specifically on the Uganda project from an upstream perspective, but looking at the pipelines, etc., that are now going. In fact, in Uganda, that's now going ahead. That's been FID. Total are leading that Uganda project, but major $10 billion, 1 billion barrel project with a pipeline going out to Tanzania. Those were interesting things to work on. After that, I kind of went on to being leading a team in Ghana with a team of analysts, and then becoming a commercial advisor in Tullow, working across sort of M&A deals, new country entry for PSCs, and even some decommissioning for my stints, decommissioning contracts. And that kind of winding path led me to about a year ago coming into BP as a commercial advisor, principally playing on my experience in the commercial advisory sense in Tullow, and how transferable that would be across to building contracts and negotiations in BP. And it seemed to work because I'm still sat here a year later. I've got through my probation and I got the job. So yeah, I guess the next slide. This kind of links to what I was just saying. The important thing for what I was trying to, rather than just kind of boring everyone with my CV, I think the important thing I was trying to express was that my route was kind of winding, and there were many times along that winding path that I kind of thought I may never get to working in renewables or sustainability or something that I felt was hopefully contributing to the energy transition, but I have got there in the end. And I guess a few of my kind of thoughts and reflections on how to make it happen. Obviously, the first kind of sub bullet there is, a new role in commercial. I mean, that's very much my subjective experience, but commercial is good in the sense that you get a big overview. I think someone mentioned earlier that in smaller companies, you get to wear many hats, and that's absolutely true. And I think in commercial, in small and medium companies, you get to wear many, many more hats, because not only are you sitting across multiple parts of your discipline, but you're sitting across the entire company and trying to understand how it all comes together. And that's a really good way of ensuring that you've got good transferable skills, so you can understand exactly where the pinch points are for an organization and what the important things are to understand. I would encourage you to look at how big oil and gas projects, if your background is oil and gas, you're thinking, oh, should I go into another oil and gas company, or is that not going to get me the experience I need to transition? Big oil and gas companies have massive energy requirements, and they have to manage those energy requirements. And I'll give the example of Kenya, when I was working there as an analyst. As soon as I'd come out of the geological sphere, I realized how big the challenge was just providing enough power to keep the pumps going in a development like Kenya, where you need to drill many wells and keep cycling water. And what that meant was that we needed to source power, and the grid's not particularly reliable in Kenya. And you had to start to think about, well, do we start our own geothermal project to provide the power for the pumping the injectors, or is there some other way we can do it? Do we need gas generators? We've got plenty of gas in the early years, but it tails off in the later years. So how do we handle that? We've got excess gas in the early years, not enough in the later yees. All those sorts of problems you had to handle and think about what the best way of dealing with it was. And we had a whole plethora of things, from solar and wind to, as I say, geothermal, and then even what to do with the excess gas in the early years, including potentially using it to mine Bitcoin was one suggestion. So there's a lot of interesting things that go on in terms of power management for your own companies if you're in oil and gas, or even if you get into or stay in oil and gas. And I'd encourage you to get involved in that, because those problems are exactly, or very similar problems to what we're trying to solve on the transition side of the business. Gas, I think people throw oil and gas into the same category, but I would separate them. I think gas is still got quite an important role to play, in many parts of the world. And as a geologist, particularly if you're a geologist with a commercial bent, the skills you would learn in gas exploration production are very transferable. I mean, gas acts much more like, or is much more closely linked to the power market. So when you're thinking about the present grid in the UK or parts of Europe, traditionally it's been powered much by gas. So if you understand how gas works, you have a good chance of understanding how a lot of the commercial agreements are working across Europe, and indeed the grid. Finally, every company has climate commitments. When we think about Tullow Oil, for instance, my previous company committed to net zero, and I think in scope 1 and scope 2, it obviously had to figure out how it was going to achieve that. And that meant that roles became available. I didn't do them myself, but there were roles became available, and my colleagues did them in terms of thinking about how we reported our emissions as a company, and how we ensured that we met those net zero commitments. And that opened up a new role that one of my fellow analysts jumped into, but equally a geologist could have jumped into a role like that. That particular colleague I'm talking about now works specifically in sustainability for a company called Johnson Matthey. So I think the overarching thing I'm trying to say here is you don't need to jump straight into a company, for instance, like Ørsted. Ørsted's going to be difficult right now because they're having some trouble, but if you were going to jump into thinking you needed to jump into a transition company traditionally, you may not need to. You may actually get the opportunities you need within an oil and gas company. So don't think that you need to jump straight across. It might be easier to do a kind of slow phase transition and be ready to take on the role you want, rather than jumping straight into a very junior role or something that doesn't quite suit you in a company you would traditionally see as transition. So the next slide, I think particularly in BP, it seems, no presentation is complete without a Venn diagram. But actually, what I'm really trying to pull on here is, I've been in BP for a year now, and I've kind of learned that there is a hell of a lot of crossover between what I was doing at Tullow and what BP is doing with its gas and low carbon team. Particularly, I'd say, You know, in the oil and gas skill set that we have, you understand the scale of major oil and gas projects. You have to be adaptable, and you have to have that willingness to accept change, you know, particularly when you're working in, say, exploration. And, you know, we've probably all on the call, if we worked in oil and gas, experienced an exploration failure. And how do you get up, dust yourself off and move on from an exploration failure? You know, in the transition, not all projects are going to work. A lot of the projects are struggling because costs are high. There isn't the same market as there is for oil and gas, and it's all nascent. So many projects are dropping off the list as quickly as they're coming onto the list. So you need to be prepared to work on a project that maybe doesn't get through to FID. And that's something that oil and gas people have a lot of experience of, because many of our projects are very hairy, very risky, and we know that not all of them are going to make it when it comes to actually spending the big bucks and executing these. I won't go through everything on the Venn diagram here. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. One of them, and this is more drawing on the experience I've had since I've moved into BP, one of them is weather. Most of us geologists on the call, geophysicists, will have experienced using probabilistic modeling, probabilistic science in understanding how to assess the economics of your project and communicate that to management. It's no different with weather. We still have to take a statistical view on weather, and that has a direct impact, for instance, in hydrogen, as to how much hydrogen you're going to produce. And there's incredible similarities actually between the probabilistic analysis of weather and production, and the probabilistic analysis of the subsurface and understanding production. So, you know, we'll still look at a P10 to a P90 range, and we'll still try to understand what that means for the economics, and we'll still try to communicate that to management. And those skills are incredibly transferable. Although we're not weather experts as geologists, we're very, very skilled at communicating uncertainty. And that's something you still have to do to a major extent with these transition areas. Other things, biogas. I've used that example here. BP acquired a company called Archaea last year who produce gas from landfill sites. And as you can imagine, you know, there's a lot of things that a reservoir engineer can get their teeth stuck into there. They still have pressure management, producer sweep, saturation, production index on wells to think about. You know, it's totally opened my eyes up to it when I read the press release and I delved a bit deeper and asked a few people in BP what actually happens here. You know, and it is you can directly transfer a lot of the skills that reservoir engineers have across to things like producing from a landfill site. It's more complicated than you'd think. I mean, there's a lot of there's toxicity and pressure to manage, and you need subsurface professionals to do it. I think finally on the bottom, I've already touched on the scale of projects, but you know, long-term major projects, they are things that people who come from oil and gas background understand very well, and it crosses over very well into these transition areas where people who perhaps have worked have utility backgrounds, have worked in your traditional, you know, power providers. They may not be used to the amount of risk that we have in the transition area, the transition technologies. So actually, when you come from an oil and gas perspective, you're very used to that level of risk, the nascent market risk. Okay, in oil and gas, it's not nascent market, but it's more, we know that drilling a well always comes with risk and major capex risk. That's not necessarily as well understood on the power side of things. Final slide. Hopefully I'm not going over time. Final slide, just a little bit on BP. You know, I think BP are still recruiting in certain areas. I don't know if hydrogen is any more, I'd have to check, but certainly in gas and low carbon, there is still some recruitment. And in fact, in oil and gas, there is still recruitment. And as per my second slide you know, don't rule out oil and gas. It's still a good place to go, and there's still a lot of good skills you can pick up. And if you want to slowly transition, I'd suggest it's still another way you can go. In terms of what BP is doing, committed to investing in building renewable energy. I think that's been exemplified by BP winning a 4 gigawatt wind bid in Germany this year. Also recently announcing taking another 50% in the BP Light Source company. Integrated gas portfolio. So I mean, there's still gas. There's still investment going on in future gas production in BP. Bioenergy solutions for aviation, marine, heavy duty transportation. You may have seen, I think quite recently, maybe even last week, BP provided 100% of or provided most of the fuel for a sustainable aviation fuel for a Virgin flight across the Atlantic last week. So this is an area that BP is very much getting stuck into. Obviously, hydrogen CCUS, that's what I'm involved in. BP is building we have plans to develop electrolyzers across the globe, and indeed use the hydrogen in our refineries and sell the hydrogen to third parties. Finally, driving new decarbonisation technologies. You can look recently at, I think BP announced a partnership with Johnson Matthey to develop technology on blue hydrogen at H2 Teesside in the northeast of England, as one example of this going on. I think that's probably time for me. Hopefully that's been useful. Any questions? I'll try and stick around for another 15-20 minutes, but I may need to drop just before 4 o'clock UK or 4 o'clock your time, 3 o'clock UK time. Cheers.
Okay, over to me then. Thank you, Alex, for a good story, and also thank you to the EFG for having me today. My name is Louise Vad-Pickering, and I'm a geoscientist by background, working in geoscience project management. Yes, please go on to the next slide. Yes, so I work in energy transition project as a project manager, geoscientist, various business development activities, and currently advising clients, doing due diligence, doing project management, technical lead, and also technical evaluations on various types of projects. I'm a subsurface professional with 17 years of geoscience and leadership experience in the international energy industry. As I said, so I have in recent years worked on renewable and low carbon energy projects such as wind farms, CCUS, geothermal, and energy infrastructure projects for COWI and a leave in a consultancy role. But I do have extensive experience from the oil and gas exploration development value chain, working for Equinor for nearly 15 years. I started out in Denmark. I'm a Dane, took a bachelor in geology and a master in marine geology and basin geology from Aarhus University in Denmark. I then had the desire to go abroad and went to Norway and was offered a job by Statoil back then in mid-Norway in Trondheim, where I had a fantastic experience and working on field development projects there. I later moved to Stavanger in a similar type of role, and then later on to the UK, where I worked for many years. So my experience is technical and project manager roles in oil and gas, exploration and development, North Atlantic and North Sea, and I a strong background in that to then go into more energy transition type roles, which I did a couple of years ago. If you go on to the next slide, then so a couple of years ago, I had a desire to do more energy transition type roles and a new challenge, and through network and also doing short courses and readings and publications and so on. I did a bit of training and then got a job post COWI in Denmark, and has since then worked on various geoscience and project management type roles. I guess some of my reflections from the transferable skills we have in the oil and gas is that I do think we have a very strong geoscience, most that work in oil and gas, strong geoscience background, subsurface knowledge, both geoscience, but we have also worked with operations, acquiring seismic, at least I had, drilling wells, lots of analysis of data and integration of data. And that is very applicable in other industries as well. I guess there's also something about being in exploration. I think, I think you have an open mindset. You often are used to going out and finding information and sticking it together. And data mining is something I've also been able to use in my later roles and coming up with ideas as well. And as many of the others here today have said, risk assessments and management is something we do very well in oil and gas. This uncertainty about the subsurface, assessing that, communicating that, it's a very transferable skill as well. That's not something that's not necessarily used in all other industries, or at least when I work with clients that come in where they don't have the subsurface background, they think of a uniform earth, and I guess communicating those risks and the timeline associated with developing subsurface projects is a key thing. Yes, and then another skills that are transferable, general leadership and project management type skills are also very transferable into other industries. So if you have had license management or assets management, the cycle that it goes through, the maturation cycles, the budgets, the contracts you have to deal with, and stakeholder management is all key skills that can be used in other sectors. Elements of business development, bid rounds, farm in, farm out, data rooms are also applicable. For example, due diligence for investors is something I've been involved with in the renewable industry, which has been very similar type, as you can say, when you have the data rooms in oil and gas. Also, I would also say having just area knowledge is a good thing. So knowing for my part, knowing a lot about the Northwest Europe, the reservoirs there and the subsurface there can be applied across multiple sectors. And I guess just also working in multidisciplinary teams and having international teamwork, listening and working across boundaries is also something that can be applied in all sectors. And again, for all sectors, also communication and presentation skills is something that is applicable to many areas. So some of these skills that I've used in my work in the renewable and low carbon energy type projects is, for example, in wind farms, been involved with ground models there, where a lot of pre-investigation work is going on. Geophysical surveys has been gathered and creating ground models for those wind farms, using integrated data, seismic data, borehole data, or CPTs, as they use a lot in geotechnical investigations, and that is also something that's done a lot in the wind industry, and that is something that's also continuing, although there's a little bit of a wobble in the wind industry at the moment. Then pre-investigations are still very much on. So that's more the shallow geology, but then if you go to the deeper geology, and I've also been fortunate enough to be involved with some CCUS and geothermal projects, where our deep geology skills and deep reservoir characterization skills are very, very applicable. Understanding of reservoir and seal wells, being able to interpret the type of data from wells and seismic, performing risk assessments are very, very valuable, and where these are core oil and gas skills. There's of course some new elements to be learned as well, and I've had the advantage of working with some good industry colleagues, and also I've taken some short courses to brush up on those skills. But I do think what we have as a basic geology, geophysics skill set is very, very applicable. Also, just for making roadmaps and understanding the value chain of those types of projects, again, I think is something the oil and gas industry is very used to, how long it typically take to develop these types of projects, the uncertainty and risk that's associated with these things. Yes, and as mentioned earlier, communication and presentation, project management and leadership is all very applicable skills to all sectors. Yep, and then some takeaways from my transition is, I guess, to keep an open mindset and being adaptable. But yeah, I do think we have a strong foundation, but there are also some new elements to be learned. And then the importance of network. Use that, and it is important to get into new roles. Yeah, I've talked about the learning and reading a bit. Again, I don't suggest necessarily going out and taking a new master's degree or something like that, but just follow the industries and maybe take some short courses is a good thing, or at least have been for me. Yes, and again about I said we had the strong background, but another thing is other industries don't necessarily understand the oil and gas skill sets, and so it is important that kind of explain and sell yourself. But I think there's also not just selling yourself, but also selling what is important for project developments and de-risking and so on. I've seen that on several projects, and I think there's really is new opportunities for all parties, both ways, for both people come from an oil and gas background, but also for the companies out there in doing renewables or low carbon energy projects, learning from each other and understanding the skills, and that's very relevant. And it is an exciting space to be in right now with as the energy transitions evolve. And I guess I've been lucky to have some time in Denmark as well, where there's a big push for it there. Also in many other countries, but there is a lot going on there, combining both lots of wind energy coming in with power to X, hydrogen type companies, CCS, CO2 storage, and also looking into geothermal developments. That is has been an interesting journey for me, and it is an interesting journey for me. So that's all what I had to say today. I'm very happy to take some questions and later, and thank you for listening.
Looks like I'm up next. Thank you very much, Louise. If we go to the first slide, please. So I'm Andy Wood. I'm currently working in the geothermal industry. I stem from oil and gas, like everybody else here. My move into oil and gas was the result of meeting a graduate who finished the year before me in a pub. And he told me that he was doing a job which meant that he could basically have 6 months vacation a year. And I didn't really know very much about what he was doing, but about 3 months later, I was on an oil rig in the North Sea. And from there, start in mud logging, I went through well site geology with 11 years on rigs in total. And then I jumped on to operations geology, and ultimately the last half of my career was spent leading teams of operations geologists and focusing very much on operational optimization and cost saving. As David said at the beginning of these presentations, most people here are very, very pro oil and gas, and I'm certainly one of those. And I'm grateful for the training that I've received as a result of my time in oil and gas. It's been an absolute godsend for my career in geothermal. A lot of us have spoken about our backgrounds and what we're doing in our various careers, but I wanted to touch a little bit on how I made that move from oil and gas into geothermal. I discovered quite soon on that I couldn't actually rely on meeting someone in a pub in order to get me into the geothermal business, and I was kind of stuck because we receive a huge amount of training in oil and gas, and it benefits us, it benefits the companies that we work with and for. One of the things that we're not trained to do is to sell ourselves and to move on to other roles. Of course, it's not in the best interest of our employers to do that. So I was kind of stuck. I got to a stage, I was 50 years old and looking for a move to geothermal energy. I decided that my environmentalist background and my love for drilling had to result in a job in geothermal. I just didn't know anybody who worked in the business or how to go about making that move. And this is kind of an important aspect of the energy transition is how to do it. What I did was I asked somebody for help. I didn't really know very much about LinkedIn. I thought that LinkedIn was something that was there to help you stay in touch with former colleagues. I had just under 400 connections when I started looking into this about, well, I want to say four or more years ago now. But none of my connections were in geothermal energy. So I actually went as far as asking the help of a careers advisor, something as simple as that. And what I did is I had a meeting with this guy. He's called Andrew McCaskill. He's quite a significant careers advisor now. He ran something called the Executive Career Jump Club. Andrew spent an hour or so with me. He looked at my LinkedIn profile, he looked at my CV. He told me my CV was okay, but it could be improved. But he also told me it wasn't that important. The content of the CV is important, but it didn't matter because my LinkedIn profile was atrocious. And that meant that nobody could see what I was doing. Nobody could see who I was, what I was about. And they certainly couldn't see what I was looking for. So I went through a very simple process. I spent some time learning how to leverage LinkedIn. And as a result, I expanded my network. I talked a lot and I learned a lot. Going back to something that many people have said here today is it's important to learn. My source of learning about geothermal was LinkedIn. And the reason for that is that the technologies are changing so rapidly at the moment that it's difficult to read a book or sit a course which is current. A lot of geothermal textbooks, for example, will focus almost entirely on open loop systems. Open loop systems are great, but they're only half of the business at the moment. So in order to learn, I jumped onto LinkedIn and I followed this process, how to use the algorithms to benefit what I wanted in order to expand my network and to get my posts out. It's very difficult, particularly as an Englishman, to try and promote yourself because we tend to be kind of reserved. But I certainly got over that quite quickly and learned that it was okay to approach people directly and talk to them about, for example, geothermal energy. And that's what I did. So I expanded my network. I talked about the benefits of geothermal, but also how it can work hand in hand with oil and gas. And because of that, and the way I think that perhaps I was presenting, then I found that my network was expanding quite rapidly. After following that process, I managed to speak to the right person and ultimately ended up with a job in geothermal. The way I did that was interesting in that I was told to write an article by this mentor from LinkedIn. And he said, make the article about something that basically highlights the skills that you have. Coincidentally, I'd already written an article, which I called Making the Invisible Visible. The reason for the title, it was based on the cost saving and optimization processes that I followed in oil and gas. And that article became the basis of my first ever LinkedIn article. And it effectively, it was a test case to show how I'd saved operators money through contract optimization, through process optimization, through basic contract management, through data acquisition, restrictions and rationalizations, and through so many other parts of my operational background. So this paper that I'd written was 5,000 words long. It was a bit hefty. In order to get it onto LinkedIn at the time, it had to be less than 2,000 words. So what I ended up doing was taking out all of the oil and gas examples. And that was a very interesting, enlightening process for me, because I ended up with a list of 12 things with different descriptions about how they were my transferable skills. Project management, for example, something that is a common theme here. This contract management, various other bits and pieces of the everyday life that I had in oil and gas, which could be applied to absolutely anything. The article that was published ended up being basically completely devoid of oil and gas examples. And that process that I used to optimize operations could be used in farming or running a McDonald's franchise or anything else. And to me, that was quite interesting, and it speaks very clearly about the energy transition skills that we all have. So what you do is, once you've decided what to do, which avenue you want to follow, you go through this process. I went through this process through LinkedIn, built my network, and I continue to now. It's something that has been incredibly interesting for me. As David mentioned earlier on, you end up talking to some of the same people again and again, because you find that you share similar interests and have similar perspectives or diverging perspectives sometimes. But it's an invaluable tool, and it's something that really should not be underestimated. So after I'd gone through this process of publishing this paper and distributing it and as an article to a lot of people, I managed to land myself a role in geothermal. And it was a very, very interesting process. In order to help other people through that, I've published a couple of other articles, which you can see at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. One is about my energy transition, and the other one is how to optimize and leverage LinkedIn. So please take a look at those if they are a tool of any interest. So perhaps we could go to the next image, please. Thank you. So looking at the transferable skills, generally speaking, I think one of the most important things to remember is that you are not your job title. It's something that a lot of people find it very difficult to get their heads around. It says that you've been working as a petrophysicist for 15 years. That doesn't mean that that's what you are, that's all you can be. You still have all of these very high-level skills which can be used in any industry, particularly in my industry, in geothermal. We need modeling skills, for example. We need project management, again, going back to that. We need people who understand wells. The list goes on and on and on. In geothermal, we model both reservoirs and heat transfer. If you're used to working as a reservoir engineer, those skills are things that you already have there. So it's important to remember that looking at the screen here, the list of everything, for example, geothermal, we need commercial people, we need people with contracts knowledge, we need QHSE, process engineering, legal, it goes on and on and on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't be deterred by the fact that you don't see that your job role is being advertised in the industry of your choice. Have a look at your key skills. Make sure that those skills are understood by you, but more importantly, understood by the people that you're trying to get to listen to your pitch. Could I have a look at the next slide, please? More words, I'm afraid. But for me, the important thing to remember here is that once you've decided that you're going to make that energy transition, have a look at expanding your pool of opportunity by looking at those in networks around you. The geothermal business, for example, as well as many others, are expanding incredibly rapidly at the moment. You don't necessarily need to leave your role in oil and gas in order to transition into renewable energy. Something that Alex touched on earlier on, many oil and gas companies have their own energy transition teams. And it's a very good way of not being affected by that pay hit that has been touched on a few times by previous presenters. Oil and gas companies tend to pay a little bit more, so perhaps you can work in renewable energy and remain within an oil and gas company. It's perhaps a good way of solving that particular issue. It's also a good way of dipping your foot into renewable energy without actually making the jump all the way. It's a safety net, but why not use it if you get the opportunity? So that is something that's certainly worth investigating if you're already working in either a service company or an operatorship. Finally, I have zipped through this rather quickly because I know we're pressed for time. If you would like to learn more about geothermal, then please feel free to jump onto the Geothermal Energy Advancement Association group on LinkedIn and send in an application. I can guarantee that you'll be accepted because I'm the curator of that particular group. Also, if you would like to know anything else specifically that isn't covered in my articles, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and I will answer all the questions I can. Thanks, David. Okay.
Well, thank you very much to everybody. That I thought, I'm not just saying that because we organised it, but I thought that was actually very insightful. And I think what was interesting was that although all of the speakers had quite different stories to tell, there were some underlying themes that can be seen through each of those. And I've written down, we've got some questions and I'll go to those in a second because we only probably got 5 minutes here. But I just wrote down some key themes that I saw that were repeated time and again. And I just sort of repeat them just because I think it sort of sets the scene. You know, a winding path is something that we've all seen coming along. We're all lifelong students. I thought that was a really nice expression. We're not starting from scratch. We all have skills that everyone, and that includes all the people listening as well, they've all got skills, and some have had more experience, but we all have skills. And it's all about finding your own niche. I think that's, there is no answer. You can't say, I want to be the next, you know, Henk or Rosalie or Rodney. You know, we all have we'll all have our own different solutions to this. I also thought that knowing everything, you might not know everything, and that's okay. And asking for help, I think that's critically important. I think it's almost there's something that a lot of people kind of feel like it's almost, I'm trying to do something new. How do I handle that? Do I want to talk about that in public? Do I want to? It's almost showing weakness by asking. I see the opposite. I show so it's emotional intelligence and growth to be able to put your hand up and say, I don't know what I'm doing. Listen, I thought that's something I probably need to do more of and less talking. Entrepreneurial spirit and the dynamic aspect to a number of the people here who set up their own businesses. I think that's really inspiring. But also I think something Louise said, which is to do with it's liberating to change. It's actually, I think a lot of people, it's quite exciting and we should be inspired by that. And the very last one I wanted to mention is you are not your job title. I thought that was a great little thing at the end. You know, just because you've had the word petrophysicist in your job title since you started out doesn't mean that your only value in society is as a petrophysicist. So it's all about how you can invent yourself. So going on to the questions that are in the chat, and some of them are a little bit hard for me to summarize in a very short way, but I will try to, you know, so if I take the first one. So Eric, you know, he and I have exchanged messages, I guess, over the last couple of years, and he's always got some very profound questions. And I think, thank you for adding it. You know, he's asking about, is there a need for systems thinking practitioners, a rare education in oil and gas? So, you know, I think the answer with that, Eric, is absolutely. The challenge with a lot of energy transition roles or businesses is the lack of profit that they're making at the moment, and their ability to be more creative, shall we say, with the types of people that they hire. But I absolutely think that those who think in those spaces, you know, that really kind of deep thinking into how to run a business in a different way, they should be in those organizations rather than just, I need a geologist, a project manager, you know. And so it's how you convince companies, that's the tricky bit. But I think there's definitely space for them. Now, I've got the next question I want Louise to answer, which is from Stephen B. Is there a place for a research geologist in the wind energy or solar energy world without the structural engineering background of a civil engineer? I.e., can a geotechnician receive on-the-job training for structure aspects? Now, Louise, I was thinking about the fact that, you know, working in COWI, you know, it's obviously they don't think about things as in the same way that we do. So they have geophysicists that work in shallow assessments of wind farms, for example, but you worked on those projects as somebody who's got an oil and gas background. You didn't work as where to put a wind farm. You just applied your skills. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, yes, I think you need both the geologists and the geophysicists and the geotechnical engineers. It's not quite the same. There is some overlap, but I think geophysicists are obviously more trained to do the surveys, the data acquisition for the pre-investigations for a wind farm, for a solar farm. It's all about ground investigations. Where is the soil soft versus hard, and where's the boulders, and where's the best place to position these wind farms, wind turbines. So so there's definitely a place for a geophysicist or geologist in in the wind energy and solar energy world. COWI has a team of that service many projects in the world for this. And whether you want to then transition into, if I understand the question correctly, into a more geotechnical role, I'm sure there's also training to be had there if that is what one would wish. But you could, it's two different things: a technical engineer versus a geologist. So, and there's no need for both. So.
Okay, just to give me time to read the next questions, there's one for Andy, which is specifically listing Andy, so you can answer. Are there roles opening in geothermal for students graduating from an MSc at the moment, or are the majority of roles still for those who have already experienced in the wider industry?
Good question. The thing to remember about geothermal as an industry is that it's tiny. If you compare it to oil and gas, it's less than 1/100th of the size. It's absolutely minuscule. So that there are fewer jobs around, but I've had the privilege of working with a few MSc graduates who have jumped straight into geothermal energy from their degree. So yeah, if you work hard enough, if you are relentless enough, then those roles do exist. Absolutely.
Very good. Got another one here from Paul Bellingham. Yes, I know Paul. For any panelists, can you put your finger on the one moment, person, event that opened the door for you and how you grabbed it? I'll start while the others are thinking. But I've had a series of energy transition roles, working for a consultancy and a startup, and now with a consultancy again. But for me, the real real push into CCS happened last summer, actually, after I was attending a meeting with the Danish government, and I put some material out on LinkedIn, basically summarizing what the minister had said 2 meters away from me. The Danish Minister of Climate and Energy had said to me 2 meters away, and I was in a room with only 30 people that heard all this stuff, and I shared that information and I put it in the context of carbon capture and storage in Denmark, and provided my insights, and that triggered a whole host of conversations. It was about having some information that was informed and useful, and a bit like Andy writing something. It's about showing yourself off in a way that isn't. It's not just waving a flag. You actually got something educated to say. So getting out there, I guess, was key, and obviously attending meetings and being present in these things, not just sort of just reading a book. If anybody else has an interesting analog to say to that, or analogy, or okay. And then just looking through these other ones, and I think it's a couple more questions. So one from an anonymous attendee talking about obviously lots of oil and gas and retraining, and then doing an MA, and then had lots of rejections, and basically then went back to their drilling background. I guess there's not really a question so much here, but it's that observation that it's this thing about not having a direct path to your perfect job, and that you might have a series of steps. And I guess I would just encourage whoever that person is just to be patient. It's not a race. I think that's, there's this desperate need to try and find the perfect job, and there is no such thing as a perfect job. And you end up in a really well-paid company, but you hate the job. That's no good either. You've got to remember why you left, or you didn't necessarily leave, but if you stepped away from an organization, there was a reason for that, and you're looking for something new, and it won't be perfect, but it's a stepping stone, and it's all good experience. I think, are there any more questions, Marko? I'm just trying to see. There's one I haven't looked at here. I'm just going to read it very quickly. Talking about the role of economic geologists. This is from Radoslav Vukas. And the importance of hydrogeologists as well. And I guess, yeah, this is the point, is that we all come from different angles. Now, today we're talking about oil and gas, but I think the same can be applied to all geologists in a way. I mean, oil and gas has a particularly generous training scheme that means that it's quite easy to leverage certain skills, but let's be honest, there are some very, very, very competent and talented geologists who work in all the other all the other subsurface and geoscience domains, and we should not forget that. And I would only encourage you just to think about all those transferable skills that you have. Anybody else? Do we have any other questions? Oh,
the last comment was about connecting the participants in a sort of a group, and that's on us, I think, whether we can do that and whether that is in with GDPR regulations. So
yeah, we can certainly try and find out, and so keep an eye out from any emails from the EFG regarding that. I certainly know, talking to Glenn Burridge, who's obviously the president now of EFG, they are, this is a continuous program of trying to help people with their careers and engaging on these subjects, and there will be further activity in the spring from the EFG side. And I've said that we're quite happy to support or provide other insights. So yeah,
the best way would be then just to sign up to our news, and you'll get informed whenever something appears.
Very good.
So I don't see any other questions, David. So
okay, very good.
Okay. So thanks again, David, for moderating the Q&A session, and also for giving the presentation. And for the rest of the presenters, thank you very much for your insightful stories regarding your career development. I might add also to what David has concluded, that there's another combined point, and that is that you are not afraid to step into unknown. And that's something that many people are. Some people do it by themselves, some people are forced, but at the end, if you know what your value is, you can advance yourself and sell yourself in a new domain as easy as possible. And remember, geologists are so widely experienced and knowledgeable that we can basically work almost in any natural science domain, and even out of natural science. So thank you, everybody, for presentations. Thanks to the participants for questions, for attendance. And it was a great pleasure having with you all with us. And I sincerely hope we'll see you next time in our new webinars, whenever that follows. So thank you very much, and take care. Follow us by signing up with EFG.